Hey guys, tonight we begin with shadows cast by torchlight in stone corridors where whispered secrets shape the fate of kingdoms. The kind of conspiracies that sound too elaborate to believe, yet left their fingerprints across the pages of history. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the shadowed halls of medieval power where loyalty was currency and betrayal was an art form. The conspiracies we'll explore tonight weren't born from paranoid minds or fictional tales. They were real schemes hatched by real people who understood that a well-placed whisper could topple a throne faster than any army. Medieval Europe was a chessboard where kings, nobles, and church officials moved their pieces with calculated precision. But beneath the surface of courtly ceremonies and religious pageantry, a different game played out entirely. Secret alliances formed in monastery cells, poison found its way into royal goblets, and documents were forged with such skill that historians still debate their authenticity centuries later. The first conspiracy that demands our attention emerged from the very heart of the Catholic Church itself. In the year 1305, a French king named Philip the Fair orchestrated one of the most audacious schemes in medieval history. His target was the Knights Templar, a military order so wealthy and powerful that they had become creditors to kings across Europe. Philip owed them enormous sums of money, debts that threatened to bankrupt his kingdom. Rather than pay what he owed, he decided to destroy them entirely. The plan unfolded with surgical precision. Philip secretly coordinated with Pope Clement V, a French pontiff who owed his position to Philip's influence. Together, they crafted charges so shocking that even hardened medieval minds recoiled. The Templars, they claimed, practiced heresy, worshipped false idols, and engaged in unspeakable rituals behind closed doors. These accusations were carefully designed to be both horrifying and impossible to disprove. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, Philip struck simultaneously across France. Royal agents, armed with sealed orders, arrested every Templar they could find. The coordination was flawless, executed with the kind of planning that would impress modern intelligence agencies. Within hours, an organization that had stood for nearly 2 centuries was in chains. Under torture, many Templars confessed to the charges. Their confessions spread across Europe like wildfire, validating Philip's accusations in the eyes of those who wanted to believe them. But here's where the conspiracy reveals its true genius. Philip had learned from previous attempts to suppress religious orders that half measures invited retaliation. So he made sure the destruction was total. The Templars' vast wealth didn't vanish into thin air. It flowed directly into Philip's treasury, conveniently erasing his debts and funding his future ambitions. Their lands were redistributed to his allies, strengthening the network of loyalty that kept him in power. Even their mystique was weaponized, transformed from holy warrior prestige into cautionary tales about pride and corruption. Modern historians have uncovered evidence that Philip's agents spent months before the arrests gathering intelligence, identifying key Templar properties, and mapping their financial networks. This wasn't a spontaneous act of religious fervor. It was a calculated campaign of financial warfare disguised as divine justice. The conspiracy succeeded beyond Philip's wildest dreams. The Templars were officially dissolved by papal decree in 1312. Their last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, burned at the stake in 1314. Legend claims that de Molay cursed Philip and the Pope from the flames, and both men died within the year. Whether curse or coincidence, the timing added another layer to the conspiracy's enduring mystique. But Philip's scheme against the Templars was merely practice for an even more ambitious plot. Having successfully eliminated one inconvenient creditor, he turned his attention to the papacy itself. The French king had grown tired of sharing power with Rome, tired of papal interference in his domestic affairs, and tired of being treated as just another monarch, rather than the sovereign he believed himself to be. The conspiracy that followed became known as the Babylonian captivity of the church, though the men who orchestrated it would never have used such dramatic language to them. It was simply politics by other means. Philip had learned that controlling the Pope was more valuable than destroying him. So he set about engineering a papal election that would place a French pontiff under French influence in a French city. The plan required patience and precision. Philip's agents worked quietly within the College of Cardinals, offering incentives to some and applying pressure to others. French gold bought French loyalties, while French threats eliminated French opposition. When Pope Boniface VIII died in 1303, Philip was ready to ensure his replacement would be more amenable to royal influence. The election of Clement V marked the beginning of 7 decades during which the papal court resided not in Rome, but in Avignon, a city that, while technically independent, sat squarely within the French sphere of influence. This wasn't a hostile takeover, but something far more subtle. The papacy remained officially autonomous, while becoming practically subservient to French interests. Contemporary chroniclers noted the gradual shift in papal behavior. Bulls that might have challenged French policies were delayed or never issued. Church appointments increasingly favored candidates with French connections. Even the papal treasury seemed to align suspiciously often with French financial needs. The conspiracy had transformed the spiritual leadership of Western Christendom into an extension of French foreign policy. Yet Philip's machinations pale in comparison to a conspiracy that emerged from an entirely different corner of medieval Europe. In the Italian city-states of the 14th century, political intrigue reached levels of sophistication that wouldn't be seen again until the Renaissance. The Visconti family of Milan perfected the art of the long-term conspiracy, weaving plots that spanned generations and crossed international boundaries. Gian Galeazzo Visconti inherited control of Milan in 1378 and immediately began planning not just to expand his territory, but to fundamentally reshape the political landscape of northern Italy. His conspiracy was remarkable for its scope and patience. Rather than relying on military conquest alone, he used marriage alliances, financial manipulation, and carefully orchestrated betrayals to achieve his goals. The conspiracy began with intelligence gathering on a scale unprecedented for its time. Visconti maintained networks of informants in every major Italian city, from merchants who reported on economic conditions to servants who overheard private conversations. This information flowed back to Milan, where it was analyzed and used to predict the actions of rival powers. Armed with superior intelligence, Visconti could anticipate his enemies' moves and counter them before they fully developed. When Florence planned to ally with Naples against Milan, Visconti's agents were already negotiating with Neapolitan nobles who felt undervalued by their king. When Venice considered expanding westward, Milanese gold was already flowing to Venetian merchants who preferred profitable trade agreements to costly wars. The genius of Visconti's approach lay in its indirection. He rarely attacked problems head-on, preferring to create conditions where his enemies would defeat themselves. A rival city might find its trade routes mysteriously disrupted by bandits who seemed to know exactly when valuable caravans would be traveling. A hostile noble might discover that his creditors had all simultaneously decided to call in their debts. These seemingly unconnected events were actually carefully orchestrated components of larger strategic plans. Visconti understood that medieval society was held together by webs of personal relationships, financial obligations, and family loyalties. By manipulating these connections, he could achieve results that would have required massive armies to accomplish through direct force. The conspiracy reached its climax in the 1390s when Visconti simultaneously moved against multiple targets across northern Italy. Cities that had resisted Milan for generations suddenly found themselves isolated, their allies bought or intimidated into neutrality. Their resources stretched thin by mysterious crises that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Within a decade, the Visconti had transformed Milan from a regional power into the dominant force in northern Italy. Their success came not through superior military might, though they were formidable warriors, but through superior understanding of how power really worked in medieval society. They had turned conspiracy from a desperate tool of the weak into a precision instrument of statecraft. But perhaps the most chilling conspiracy of the medieval period involved not the pursuit of power or wealth, but something far more personal. In the royal court of France during the early 14th century, a scandal erupted that would shake the very foundations of monarchical legitimacy. It became known as the Tour de Nesle affair, and its implications reached far beyond the individuals directly involved. The conspiracy centered on allegations that the wives of 3 French princes had been conducting adulterous relationships with Norman knights. In most societies, such accusations would have been handled quietly within the family. But in medieval France, where royal bloodlines determined succession and legitimacy was everything, adultery wasn't just personal scandal. It was treason of the highest order. King Philip IV, the same monarch who had destroyed the Templars, found himself facing a crisis that threatened to destroy his dynasty from within. If the accusations were true, then the legitimacy of future heirs could be questioned. If they were false, then his family was being targeted by enemies willing to use the most intimate weapons imaginable. The investigation that followed revealed a conspiracy of staggering complexity. Secret meetings had been arranged through coded messages passed by seemingly innocent servants. Alibis had been carefully constructed using trusted accomplices who were willing to perjure themselves under oath. Even physical evidence had been planted and manipulated to support or contradict various versions of events. What made this conspiracy particularly sinister was its use of sexual scandal as a political weapon. The conspirators understood that in medieval society, a woman's reputation was both her most valuable asset and her greatest vulnerability. By targeting the royal women, they could strike at the heart of royal legitimacy while maintaining plausible deniability about their true motives. The affair ended with executions, imprisonments, and the systematic destruction of everyone connected to the alleged adultery. Whether the original accusations were true or fabricated remains a subject of historical debate. What's certain is that the conspiracy succeeded in its apparent goal of destabilizing the French royal family and creating succession crises that would plague the kingdom for generations. These were not isolated incidents, but examples of a broader pattern that defined medieval politics. In a world where written contracts were rare and legal systems were primitive, conspiracy became a necessary tool for those who understood that reputation, relationships, and carefully managed information were often more powerful than armies or treasuries. The sophistication of these medieval conspiracies reveals something uncomfortable about human nature. We like to imagine that our ancestors were simpler, more direct, perhaps more honest than we are, but the evidence suggests otherwise. Medieval conspirators possessed psychological insights that would impress modern intelligence agencies. They understood how to exploit fear, greed, and ambition with surgical precision. Consider the conspiracy that brought down Edward II of England in 1327. His queen, Isabella of France, had grown tired of her husband's incompetence and his preference for male favorites over royal duties. But rather than simply complaining or seeking a divorce, which would have been impossible anyway, she orchestrated one of the most elegant coups in medieval history. Isabella's conspiracy began not in England, but in France, where she had traveled ostensibly to negotiate a peace treaty between her husband and her brother. Once on French soil, she refused to return, claiming that Edward's advisors posed a threat to her safety. This wasn't mere dramatics. Isabella was laying the groundwork for what would follow. From her exile in France, Isabella began cultivating relationships with English nobles who had grown disenchanted with Edward's rule. Her agents spread carefully crafted stories about the king's failures, his weakness, his unsuitability for the throne. These weren't random gossip, but targeted propaganda designed to erode Edward's support among the very people he needed most. The genius of Isabella's approach lay in her patience. She didn't rush into open rebellion, but allowed discontent to build naturally, while she positioned herself as the solution to England's problems. When she finally returned to England in 1326, she came not as a conquering enemy, but as a liberating force welcomed by nobles who had convinced themselves they wanted change. Edward's deposition followed swiftly. The conspiracy had succeeded so thoroughly that resistance crumbled almost immediately. The king found himself abandoned by allies who had been secretly undermined for months, facing enemies who had been carefully prepared for this moment. Isabella had turned his own kingdom against him without firing a shot. But the most chilling aspect of Isabella's conspiracy was what happened next. Edward wasn't simply deposed and exiled. He was murdered in Berkeley Castle under circumstances so suspicious that even contemporary chroniclers struggled to maintain the official fiction of natural death. The murder was carried out in a way that left no obvious wounds, allowing Isabella's regime to claim the former king had died of grief or illness. Modern forensic analysis suggests Edward was killed by having a red-hot iron rod inserted into his body through his rectum, a method chosen not just for its lethality, but for its symbolic cruelty. This wasn't random violence, but a carefully planned execution designed to send a message about what happened to kings who failed to meet their obligations. Isabella's conspiracy succeeded because she understood something fundamental about medieval power structures. Legitimacy wasn't just about bloodlines or legal rights. It was about perception, about convincing enough people that change was not only necessary, but inevitable. By the time she moved against Edward, she had already won the real battle for hearts and minds. Yet even Isabella's sophisticated plotting pales beside the conspiracy that emerged from the papal court in the late 13th century. Pope Celestine V had been elected in 1294 as a compromise candidate, a hermit monk, chosen precisely because he seemed to have no political ambitions. What the cardinals didn't anticipate was that his very innocence would make him a target for manipulation. Cardinal Benedetto Caetani, who would later become Pope Boniface VIII, recognized an opportunity when he saw one. Celestine's unworldliness made him vulnerable to advisors who claimed to have his best interests at heart. Caetani positioned himself as the Pope's most trusted counselor, gradually taking control of papal decision-making while allowing Celestine to maintain the illusion of authority. The conspiracy unfolded through a series of seemingly innocent suggestions. Caetani would present Celestine with complex administrative problems, then offer to handle the details while the Pope focused on spiritual matters. Gradually, more and more papal functions shifted to Caetani's control. Bulls were drafted in his office, appointments were made on his recommendation, and financial decisions flowed through his oversight. When Celestine finally realized what was happening, it was too late. Caetani had built such an extensive network of supporters within the papal bureaucracy that resistance seemed impossible. The hermit pope found himself trapped in a web of obligations and dependencies that made independent action virtually impossible. The conspiracy reached its climax when Caetani convinced Celestine that the papacy was corrupting his soul and that true holiness required abdication. This wasn't presented as political pressure, but as spiritual guidance from a trusted advisor. Celestine, overwhelmed by the complexities of papal politics and genuinely concerned about his spiritual welfare, agreed to step down. Caetani's election as Boniface VIII followed immediately. The transition was so smooth that many observers failed to recognize the conspiracy that had made it possible Celestine was imprisoned to prevent any inconvenient second thoughts. And Caetani assumed the papal throne with an established power base already in place. This conspiracy was remarkable for its subtlety. Unlike the crude violence that characterized many medieval power struggles, Caetani had achieved his goals through psychological manipulation and bureaucratic maneuvering. He had turned the papal court's own procedures against itself, using legitimate processes to accomplish illegitimate ends. The techniques employed by these medieval conspirators reveal a sophisticated understanding of human psychology that challenges our assumptions about the intellectual capacity of past civilizations. They knew how to identify and exploit individual weaknesses, how to build networks of complicit allies, and how to time their moves for maximum impact. Take the conspiracy that destroyed the Cathars in southern France during the early 13th century. The Albigensian Crusade is often portrayed as a religious war, but the evidence suggests it was actually an elaborate land grab disguised as holy warfare. The conspiracy involved not just the French crown and the Catholic Church, but also northern French nobles who saw an opportunity to seize the wealthy territories of Languedoc. The conspiracy began with intelligence gathering that would have impressed modern spy agencies. Agents posing as merchants, pilgrims, and even sympathetic clergy infiltrated Cathar communities, mapping their defenses, identifying their leaders, and cataloging their resources. This information was systematically compiled and used to plan military campaigns that struck with devastating precision. But the real genius of the anti-Cathar conspiracy lay in its propaganda campaign. The conspirators didn't simply attack the Cathars militarily. They systematically destroyed their reputation, spreading stories about their alleged depravity and heretical practices. These tales were crafted to appeal to specific audiences, playing on existing prejudices and fears. Northern French nobles heard stories about Cathar wealth that was being wasted on heretical practices instead of supporting proper Christian knights. Church officials were told about theological errors that threatened the very foundations of orthodoxy. Common people were frightened with tales of devil worship and sexual perversion that supposedly flourished in Cathar territories. The conspiracy succeeded because it gave each participant group what they wanted while maintaining the fiction that this was all about religious purity. The French crown expanded its territories southward. Northern nobles gained new estates. The church eliminated a theological rival, and everyone could claim they had served God's will. The destruction of the Cathars was so thorough that historians still struggle to separate fact from propaganda when studying their beliefs and practices. The conspirators didn't just kill their enemies. They erased them from history, ensuring that future generations would know them only through the distorted lens of their destroyers' accounts. These conspiracies shared certain characteristics that made them particularly effective. They combined long-term planning with tactical flexibility, allowing conspirators to adapt their methods as circumstances changed. They relied on networks of allies who were given different pieces of the larger puzzle, reducing the risk that any single betrayal could expose the entire operation. Most importantly, they understood that the most effective conspiracies don't look like conspiracies at all. They appear to be natural developments, inevitable consequences of existing tensions and conflicts. The conspirators positioned themselves not as puppet masters, but as servants of larger forces, whether divine will, natural justice, or historical necessity. The medieval world was shaped by these hidden hands far more than most people realize. Behind the grand narratives of kings and battles, saints and sinners, lay a shadow world of calculated manipulation and patient scheming. The men and women who mastered these dark arts didn't just change history. They wrote it, ensuring that their versions of events would be remembered while their methods remained hidden in the shadows where they belonged. The mastery of these medieval conspirators extended beyond mere political maneuvering into realms that would make modern intelligence operatives envious. They understood that information itself could be weaponized, that timing could multiply the impact of even modest resources, and that the most devastating attacks often came from directions their enemies never thought to guard. Consider the conspiracy that unfolded in the Byzantine Empire during the reign of Emperor Alexios I Komnenos. In the late 11th century, the Bogomil heretics had established themselves throughout the empire, but their true threat wasn't theological. They had created a shadow network of communication and mutual aid that operated parallel to imperial authority. What made them dangerous wasn't their beliefs, but their organization. The conspiracy to destroy them began not with theological arguments, but with financial warfare. Imperial agents discovered that Bogomil communities had developed sophisticated systems for moving money and messages across vast distances. These networks were more efficient than official imperial channels, making them attractive to merchants and nobles who needed to conduct business quickly and quietly. Rather than attacking the heretics directly, the conspiracy focused on corrupting their networks from within. Imperial gold bought the loyalty of key Bogomil messengers and financiers. False information was fed into their communication systems, creating confusion and mistrust. Gradually, the very efficiency that had made their networks valuable became a vulnerability that could be exploited. The final phase of the conspiracy was breathtakingly elegant. Rather than conducting mass arrests that would have created martyrs and driven the movement underground, imperial agents used the corrupted Bogomil networks to spread false prophecies about an imminent divine revelation. Communities were told to gather at specific locations on predetermined dates to receive this revelation. When the Bogomils assembled as instructed, they found not divine messengers, but imperial soldiers waiting for them. The conspiracy had used their own organizational strengths to facilitate their destruction. Within months, a movement that had taken decades to build was completely eliminated, and most Byzantines never realized a conspiracy had occurred at all. This pattern of using an enemy's strengths against them appeared repeatedly in medieval conspiracies. The conspiracy against the Flemish communes in the early 14th century followed a similar template. The wealthy merchant cities of Flanders had grown powerful through their textile trade, but their prosperity made them targets for both the French crown and English merchants who wanted access to their markets. The conspiracy began with economic infiltration rather than military assault. French and English agents, posing as legitimate traders, established businesses in major Flemish cities. These operations weren't designed to be profitable in the traditional sense. Instead, they gathered intelligence about production methods, trade relationships, and political tensions within the commune leadership. Armed with this information, the conspirators began manipulating market conditions. They would flood certain markets with cheap goods to undercut local producers, then withdraw suddenly, leaving economic chaos in their wake. They spread rumors about political instability that made foreign merchants reluctant to trade with Flemish cities. They even orchestrated labor disputes by secretly funding workers' complaints about wages and conditions. The genius of this approach was that each individual action seemed like normal market fluctuation or political disagreement. Only when viewed from above could the pattern be seen clearly. The conspirators had turned the interconnected nature of medieval commerce into a weapon that could destabilize entire regions without anyone realizing they were under attack. The Flemish conspiracy succeeded because it exploited a fundamental weakness in medieval urban society. Cities had grown wealthy by specializing in particular trades or crafts, but this specialization made them vulnerable to coordinated disruption. When their markets were manipulated and their political systems corrupted simultaneously, they lacked the flexibility to respond effectively. Yet perhaps the most sophisticated conspiracy of the medieval period emerged from an unexpected source. The monastery of Cluny in Burgundy had become the center of a reform movement that claimed to be purifying the church from worldly corruption. In reality, the Cluniac conspiracy represented one of the most successful attempts to centralize religious authority under a single institution's control. The conspiracy began in the 10th century with a simple but revolutionary idea. Instead of allowing individual monasteries to operate independently under local bishops, Cluny established a network of daughter houses that remained directly subordinate to the Mother Abbey. This wasn't presented as a power grab, but as a return to primitive Christian communalism. What made this conspiracy particularly brilliant was its use of genuine religious fervor to accomplish political goals. The Cluniac reformers weren't hypocrites, cynically manipulating faith for personal gain. They genuinely believed their reforms were necessary for salvation. This sincerity made their conspiracy more effective because it eliminated the usual signs of political calculation that might have aroused suspicion. The network expanded rapidly across Europe as local nobles competed to establish Cluniac houses on their lands. Having a reformed monastery brought prestige and supposedly guaranteed divine favor for the founding family. What these nobles didn't fully understand was that they were ceding religious authority within their territories to an institution based hundreds of miles away in Burgundy. Within 2 centuries, Cluny controlled thousands of monasteries and wielded influence that rivaled papal authority itself. The conspiracy had succeeded in creating a parallel church structure that operated according to its own rules while maintaining the fiction of orthodox obedience. When conflicts arose between Cluniac interests and local authorities, the reformers could appeal to higher spiritual principles while actually defending institutional prerogatives. The Cluniac conspiracy was remarkable for its longevity and adaptability. Unlike political conspiracies that achieved immediate goals and then dissolved, this religious conspiracy evolved over generations, adjusting its methods as circumstances changed while maintaining its core objective of centralized religious authority. The techniques developed by these medieval conspirators influenced political practice for centuries afterward. Their understanding of how to build and maintain its secret networks, how to coordinate complex operations across vast distances, and how to manipulate public opinion through carefully crafted narratives became part of the toolkit of statecraft. These conspiracies also reveal something disturbing about the relationship between truth and power in medieval society. The most successful conspirators weren't those who lied most effectively, but those who understood how to reshape reality itself. They created new facts on the ground, new relationships between institutions, new ways of understanding what was possible and what was inevitable. The conspiracy against the University of Paris in the 13th century exemplifies this approach. The university had grown powerful as a center of theological learning, but its independence threatened both royal and papal authority. Rather than attacking the institution directly, conspirators worked to undermine its intellectual foundations. False texts attributed to ancient authorities were introduced into the curriculum. Debates were staged to make certain theological positions appear more controversial than they actually were. Students were recruited to spy on their professors and report any statements that could be construed as heretical or politically dangerous. The conspiracy succeeded not by destroying the University of Paris, but by transforming it. Within decades, an institution that had prided itself on intellectual independence had become a careful supporter of established authority. The change was so gradual that most participants never realized they were part of a larger pattern of manipulation. This transformation of institutions from within became a hallmark of sophisticated medieval conspiracies. Rather than replacing existing structures, conspirators learned to capture and redirect them. A monastery could be turned from a center of independent spiritual authority into an arm of royal policy. A university could be shifted from critical inquiry to orthodox confirmation. A noble court could be transformed from an autonomous political entity into a puppet of larger powers. The psychological sophistication required for such operations was extraordinary. Conspirators needed to understand not just individual motivations, but institutional dynamics, cultural patterns, and the subtle ways that ideas spread through society. They had to predict how different groups would respond to various stimuli and time their interventions for maximum impact. The conspiracy that destroyed the political independence of the Italian maritime republics in the 14th century demonstrates this psychological sophistication. Venice, Genoa, and Pisa had dominated Mediterranean trade for centuries, but their wealth and independence made them targets for larger powers seeking to control commercial routes. Rather than attacking these cities militarily, which would have been enormously expensive and might have failed, conspirators focused on exploiting the rivalries between them. Agents posing as neutral mediators encouraged disputes over trading rights and territorial boundaries. They provided intelligence to all sides in these conflicts, ensuring that tensions escalated rather than being resolved through negotiation. The conspiracy reached its climax when the maritime republics found themselves engaged in a series of simultaneous conflicts that drained their resources and destroyed their ability to maintain independent foreign policies. By the time they realized they had been manipulated, it was too late to recover their former autonomy. These medieval conspiracies succeeded because they operated according to principles that their victims didn't fully understand. In a world where most people thought in terms of direct cause and effect, conspirators had learned to think systematically about complex interactions between multiple variables. They could predict second and third order consequences of their actions, allowing them to achieve results that seemed impossible to observers who only saw the immediate effects. The legacy of these conspiracies extends far beyond their immediate historical impact. They established patterns of covert influence that would be refined and expanded in later centuries. The techniques they developed for gathering intelligence, manipulating information, and coordinating complex operations across vast distances laid the groundwork for modern intelligence agencies and propaganda systems. Perhaps most importantly, these medieval conspiracies demonstrated that the most effective forms of power are often invisible. The conspirators who shaped medieval history weren't the ones whose names appeared in chronicles or whose faces were carved on monuments. They were the shadowy figures who understood that lasting influence comes not from commanding obedience, but from shaping the conditions that make certain choices seem inevitable. The art of medieval conspiracy reached its most refined form in the networks that operated beyond any single kingdom's borders. These were conspiracies that transcended national loyalties, religious affiliations, and even dynastic ambitions. They represented a new form of power that would have seemed impossible to earlier generations, yet they flourished in the shadows of the 13th and 14th centuries. The most ambitious of these international conspiracies centered on the control of European banking. The Lombard merchants had established financial houses that stretched from London to Constantinople, creating a web of credit and debt that bound kings and peasants alike. But beneath their legitimate banking operations lay something far more sinister, a coordinated effort to manipulate the economic foundations of medieval society. The conspiracy began with a simple observation. Medieval rulers constantly needed money for wars, construction projects, and court expenses. But their income arrived in seasonal bursts tied to agricultural cycles. This mismatch between royal needs and royal resources created opportunities for those who understood how to exploit temporal arbitrage. Lombard conspirators developed techniques for creating artificial financial crises that would force rulers to borrow on unfavorable terms. They would coordinate the withdrawal of credit from multiple sources simultaneously, creating liquidity shortages that seemed like natural market fluctuations. when desperate rulers agreed to punitive interest rates and collateral arrangements. The conspirators would mysteriously discover new sources of funding that made the loans possible. The genius of this approach was that it appeared to be helping rulers solve their financial problems while actually deepening their dependence on Lombard networks. Each loan came with conditions that gradually transferred real authority from royal courts to banking houses. Customs revenues were pledged as collateral, judicial appointments required creditor approval, and even foreign policy decisions were constrained by debt obligations. Within decades, the conspiracy had created a parallel system of governance that operated through financial rather than feudal relationships. Kings might wear crowns and sit on thrones, but the real decisions about war and peace, taxation and trade were increasingly made in counting houses by men whose names never appeared in official documents. The sophistication of this financial conspiracy extended to its intelligence operations. Lombard agents maintained detailed files on the personal habits, political relationships, and economic vulnerabilities of every major figure in European politics. This information was used not just for direct manipulation, but for predictive modeling that allowed conspirators to anticipate and prepare for future developments. When the English king needed funds for his Scottish campaigns, Lombard financiers already knew which nobles would support the war and which would resist. When the French crown faced succession disputes, banking houses had already calculated the financial implications of each potential outcome. This advanced knowledge allowed them to position themselves advantageously regardless of which political forces ultimately prevailed. The conspiracy's most audacious operation involved the deliberate creation of the economic conditions that would lead to the Black Death's devastating impact. Lombard financiers had recognized that Europe's population growth was outstripping agricultural productivity, creating vulnerability to any disruption in food supplies. Rather than trying to solve this problem, they decided to profit from it. Grain speculation became a coordinated international operation. Banking houses would buy up surplus harvests in good years, storing grain in warehouses scattered across Europe. When bad harvests occurred, they could control food distribution to maximize both profit and political influence. Cities that cooperated with Lombard interests found adequate food supplies available at reasonable prices. Those that resisted faced artificial famines that could bring even the proudest communes to their knees. This manipulation of food supplies weakened European populations, just as the plague began spreading from Asia. The conspiracy hadn't caused the Black Death, but it had created conditions that made the pandemic far more devastating than it needed to be. Malnourished populations had less resistance to disease, while disrupted trade networks spread infection more rapidly than would have occurred naturally. The aftermath of the plague created opportunities that the conspirators were perfectly positioned to exploit. With traditional authority structures shattered and labor shortages driving up wages, Lombard financiers could reshape European society according to their own vision. They funded the rise of new merchant classes, while ensuring that traditional nobility remained dependent on borrowed money. Yet, even this vast financial conspiracy was overshadowed by the emergence of what modern historians call the Great Deception. This was a conspiracy so comprehensive that it attempted to rewrite the fundamental assumptions underlying medieval civilization. Its architects understood that lasting power came not from controlling existing institutions, but from controlling the ideas that gave those institutions legitimacy. The conspiracy began in the scriptoriums of major monasteries, where scholarly monks labored to preserve and copy ancient texts. What most people didn't realize was that these copying operations had been infiltrated by agents whose goal was not preservation, but transformation. They began introducing subtle changes into classical and patristic texts, alterations so minor that they escaped detection, but so significant that they gradually shifted the intellectual foundations of European thought. A phrase attributed to Augustine might be modified to suggest different conclusions about political authority. A passage from Aristotle could be adjusted to support economic theories that would have horrified the original author. Biblical commentaries were altered to emphasize certain theological interpretations while downplaying others. Each change was small enough to seem like a copying error, but collectively they amounted to a systematic revision of the intellectual inheritance that shaped medieval minds. The conspiracy's reach extended beyond textual manipulation into the realm of architectural symbolism. Church builders were provided with modified plans that incorporated symbolic elements designed to reinforce particular ideological messages. Cathedral decorations that seemed to celebrate traditional Christian themes actually contained coded references to alternative belief systems that challenged orthodox authority. Even more remarkably, the conspirators managed to influence the development of vernacular languages themselves. They funded traveling poets and storytellers who popularized certain linguistic constructions while discouraging others. Over generations, they helped shape the evolution of European languages in ways that made certain ideas easier to express and others more difficult to articulate. These shadowed corridors of medieval power reveal a truth that echoes across centuries. The conspiracies we've explored tonight weren't aberrations or exceptions to the rule of medieval politics. They were the rule itself, hidden beneath layers of ceremony and righteousness. From Philip's calculated destruction of the Templars to the subtle manipulation of language and thought itself, these schemes demonstrate that power has always belonged to those who understand how to reshape reality without leaving fingerprints. The medieval world was built not just by kings and saints, but by the invisible architects who worked in darkness to construct the very foundations of belief and authority. Their legacy lives on in every institution that claims legitimacy, every narrative that shapes our understanding of the past, and every shadow that falls across the corridors of power today.